Yesterday, I think it's yesterday, we have seen the New Year address by President Xi for 2022. And I'm curious, what touched you most when you read it?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's great to speak to you both, and thank you for asking me to comment on the speech. Yeah, I read the speech and also I noted some of the reactions to it. The issue about a New Year's speech, particularly from any global leader, is about one's expectations ahead of the speech. And sometimes one can expect too much from a speech, and therefore it's important not to read too much into a speech, but at the same time to take note of the important areas covered. From my perspective, I thought there were two issues. One was the speech was very much aimed at a very domestic audience. The second issue is what to take from it from an international perspective. From a domestic audience, naturally the speech was very aimed at being very upbeat, but the things that stood out were that there was very little focus on the current economic situation, and also the president did not go into too much detail about the current COVID pandemic. So in that respect, it was very much a speech not aimed at addressing short-term, immediate policy issues, but it's very much a statement of intent, and therefore it's a speech that needs to be seen in that context. From a domestic audience perspective, it was also a reminder of the political changes seen in 2021, and naturally, given the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, that figured high in the speech, and the recent historic statement also figured high in the speech. The president also then talked about sort of 5 different, or in passing, because it was a relatively short speech, there was not too much detail in any of these issues. But nonetheless, it was noteworthy that he drew so much attention, in my mind, to scientific progress, both in terms of reviewing 2021 and looking forward to 2022. Also very much by the focus on the strategic aspect and the lack of detail on any economic issues. Maybe one could read into that it's a more difficult economic context for 2022, but the reality is that sometimes one shouldn't overread detail into these speeches, but note that these other areas that very much matter on the day-to-day, week-to-week basis are more business as usual aspects. From a domestic audience, it was aimed at being a very strategic, positive speech, reaffirming achievements that China has made in 2021, and very much giving the message of intent that strategic ambition remains center stage for the future. From an international perspective, clearly, given that the speech was aimed at a domestic audience and that it was a New Year's speech, there was maybe not detail on some of the areas that concern international audiences. But I think the noteworthy features were, one, the reference to the scientific development and the progress that China is making on that side, the reference to the cross straits with respect to Taiwan, and the reference to Hong Kong, very much a reaffirmation of China's currency position on those issues. And also on the positive side, passing reference to the environment. In fact, nature figured very high up, I thought, in the speech. After we had the sequencing of a reminder of 2021 and the focus on the Chinese Communist Party, nature and environment featured high up. I think many international audiences will take that as a positive aspect. And then the final point from the international side, given that people are looking at China's economy, maybe some international investors and international commentators might have wanted more comment on the economy. But as I say, sometimes you can hope for too much in these speeches. But overall, when one looks at it, I thought it was very much consistent with President Xi Jinping's previous stances on all of these issues. It was very much aimed at a domestic audience. And in that respect, from the domestic side, it was very much a strategic we're on the right path from his perspective. 2021 was a very important year. 2022 is a continuation of that.
Thank you. So how do you look at China donates quite a lot of vaccination to some countries and the effort they made in last year?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I think the president mentioned the 2 billion vaccination rollout. But clearly, this is a vital area. When one looks at the pandemic, regardless of the origins of the pandemic, one of the major issues currently is the need to vaccinate the whole world. Clearly, that's a very ambitious task, and some might say too ambitious a task, but nonetheless, I think we should aim for it. The danger globally is that the longer it is that so many people remain unvaccinated, the more likely it is that we will have further variants and further problems. As we've currently seen with Omicron, there will be further variants. Therefore, vaccinating as many people globally as possible, as soon as it's achievable or as soon as it can be done, is vitally important. So the aim to vaccinate as many people globally as quickly as possible is a very positive ambition for global leaders. And in terms of the positive aspect of President Xi Jinping's speech, it's a reaffirmation of China's role in trying to address the pandemic at a global level, not just in terms of its national zero COVID policy.
So at the end of the address, President Xi said, let us all work together for the shared future. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges at the moment, because of global tensions, many speeches from not just President Xi Jinping, but other global leaders are looked at in terms of a competitive aspect or confrontational perspective. But there are many areas where major economies, major countries can collaborate and cooperate. And on the positive front was the clear statement of intent for China to continue to do more in terms of addressing the pandemic. So that cooperative aspect from the speech I thought was very important. So if one looks at it from a global perspective, the 2 areas of cooperation that very much stand out were on the nature aspect and the environment, and in terms of the rollout, in terms of the global vaccine. So both of those areas are important areas for the major economies to continue to cooperate on. From an international perspective, naturally, a lot of more of the focus near term might also be on the issues with respect to Taiwan and the issues with respect to Hong Kong. So one is weighing up those areas where naturally any country is going to be not necessarily playing to the tune of every other country, shall we say. So there's pluses and minuses in any global leader's speech. On the positive front, yes, the nature focus, but particularly the fact that the nature focus I thought was so high up in the speech. And also, as you say, the message at the end is very much about the global approach to addressing the pandemic. The other issue, as I touched on, the science aspect, I thought was noteworthy that it received such an early mention, and also that it received a number of mentions. It's consistent, even though the president didn't say this, about China trying to move its economy up the value curve.
Yes, for the the address doesn't touch GDP because it's not a government report.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's the thing I was saying at the very beginning. From a when one looks at a speech, sometimes it's about managing expectations. What will be in the speech? Look, if you're a domestic citizen, whether it's Britain, China, or indeed any other country, one expects the leader to sort of give us an upbeat speech, a sort of what are the key issues. One doesn't expect them to go into the nitty-gritty detail. But so in that respect, as long as one didn't expect the president to go into detail about the Chinese economy, it was fine. But I agree with you.
Mm.
I understand what you're saying.
The Chinese New Year will witness Olympic Games in Beijing.
Yeah.
So do you have any expectation for that?
Yeah, well, again, that figured in the speech, both in terms of the Winter Olympics and Paralympics. Well, I think that's an important showcase for China to the rest of the world. So naturally, one hopes that all global sporting events will be a success, particularly at this very difficult time for the world economy, given the inability of people to travel. We've seen the Summer Olympics a few months ago. Now we've got the Winter Olympics. So I think it is important not only for global sports people to come together, but I think it's important in terms of bringing different countries together. Of course, as we know, some countries are taking a different approach to the Olympics in non-sporting terms. So, but let's put it this way, the Winter Olympics and Paralympics will be an important showcase for China to the world. I don't think it will be the showcase that the Beijing Olympics was, for a whole host of reasons, given the pandemic, given the timing, etc. But nonetheless, it's an important showcase.
We know some of countries like US, they did the diplomatic boycott. Do you agree? What's your opinion? Is it okay to say that?
Yeah, when it comes to sporting events like this, ever since I was a student in the 1980 Olympics took place, I've always been against sporting boycotts. So I'm glad that there is no sporting boycott. What the politicians choose to do and the diplomats choose to do, I think one needs to leave to them. But I think the important message is that the sporting aspect of the games goes ahead, and hopefully that proves to be a success despite the pandemic.
Right, and also for the climate change, you already covered it. For the effort, and also I think China and US, they made surprised the world for the agreement at the end.
Well, COP26, I thought, was far more positive than many people gave it credit for, hosted here in the United Kingdom. And at the time of COP26, there was needless attention on who was actually attending in person. So I think the key message from COP26 was to look at what was actually agreed. And there are clearly areas where China, the US, but China, the UK, but China and other countries are going to cooperate on. And that's vitally important. One of the positives I found from President Xi Jinping's speech was as I said earlier, was the fact that nature figured so prominently early on in the speech. And then he alluded to international cooperation with respect to that. But that highlights how much importance is attached to this within China itself. And there are a whole host of issues linked to nature and environment. So it's not just the climate, biodiversity, water, other issues. And the president touching on the two rivers, I think very much brings a geographic, it's a understandable context, and also reinforces the nature of the water aspect. But without getting too bogged down in the detail on that, but the fact that nature and therefore implicitly the environment figured prominently, I think is a positive area where the rest of the world and China can cooperate in the future.
I know you have make a writer a forecaster for the global economy before, so I would like to have your forecast again in 2022 for China economy and also the global economy.
Well, in terms of the global economy, it should be another year of solid growth, as was the case in 2021. However, health issues clearly are center stage, and health issues have the ability to result in extreme outcomes and have the ability to disrupt the path of the global economy. But the key message really is that we're seeing a continued rebound from the depths of the pandemic. And this is helped by the policy stimulus seen globally. So it's a combination of rebound and reflation. the rebound after the hit from the pandemic and the positive aspect of cheap money and expanded fiscal policies globally. So that should help the global economy to have a solid year of growth in 2022. But the path of the economy will be heavily impacted by the pandemic and also by the way in which the pandemic not only directly impacts things, but indirectly affects confidence, business and consumer confidence. So that still points to the importance of policymakers playing a constructive role in terms of helping the world economy recover. The challenge, though, is that we have a major inflation shock feeding through at the moment, which will result in a cost of living crisis and will force central banks globally to start to tighten policy. This has already happened. When one looks at the Chinese economy, clearly China will be impacted by those global developments. But there's two very different aspects with respect to China. One is that the economic cycle in China was impacted differently by the pandemic. While China suffered like other economies because of the pandemic, it did not actually fall into a recession, and the central bank did not ease monetary policy as aggressively so early as other central banks. So now we're seeing, and the second aspect is the dual circulation policy was being rolled out from 2020 onwards. And that was a key aspect which resulted in the tough policies towards the property sector and to prevent over leverage there. And it resulted in them moving up the value curve. The point is that the economic cycle in China has been slightly different to elsewhere. But I would say that China is in what I call a growth recession at the moment. It's growing, but the pace of growth is not as strong as the economy needs, or probably as strong as policymakers would like. Therefore, there is a need for policy stimulus in China as we move through the early months of this year. And the central bank, while having a very prudent and tough monetary policy in 2021, will still focus on being prudent, but there has the ability to ease policy to help the economy recover. So I would expect the Chinese economy to be growing around 5% or so this year. Still a solid pace of growth, but maybe not as high as we experienced pre-pandemic. And the real issue for China and elsewhere is what happens as we move almost through 2022 into 2023. We've only started 2022, but in some respects, the economic issue is as much as where will the economy settle down post-pandemic in 2023? Will the growth rate return to its pre-pandemic rate? And in all likelihood, China, like other economies, will probably see growth rates slower in 2023 than in 2022, but much depends on the policy situation. Hopefully that was clear, but if you wanted me to say any of that in a tighter way, let me know.
Oh yeah, can we briefly say, are you optimistic on Chinese economy in this year?
Yeah, I'm optimistic on the global and on the Chinese economy in 2022. Clearly, the path of the economy will be heavily impacted by the pandemic and measures that are necessary to keep the pandemic in check. The important thing in China is that the policymakers have room for maneuver, both on the monetary and the fiscal front, to help the economy through 2022. And it's important, and this ties in with President Xi Jinping's speech today, about the need to focus on the strategic longer-term issues. And in economic terms, that's very much about ensuring that the dual circulation policy continues to unfold. So I'm positive about the Chinese economy in 2022, helped by an easier policy stance and a rollout of the sort of underlying strategic issues linked to dual circulation.
Right. And also President Xi recorded memory for the 100 years of CPC leading. So what's your expectation for CPC to lead China into a new stage in 2022?
Yeah, well, the two key years that always used to be mentioned in China were 2021 because of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party, and 2049 because of the centenary of the state. But in recent years, we've had 2035 being mentioned. And I think it's important to say that China has achieved great success, but there's a need to actually sort of have clear short-term deliverable goals as well as the longer-term strategic ambition. So I'm pretty positive about the outlook for the Chinese economy. The real challenge is this, but it's also an opportunity as well. The trend for the Chinese economy is clearly up, but one should expect to see greater volatility along that future path, because that's an economic reality based on where the economy is now. The Chinese economy is far bigger, far more complex than it ever was. And economies like that do not move in straight lines. Therefore, one should expect to see greater future volatility along that upward path. And that requires the need for clear policy guidance on monetary and on the fiscal front. I mean, coming back to your question, it ties in with the whole issue of political stability within China as well.
Right. So Xuan, do you have anything you'd like to ask ask Gerard today?
Sure. Thank you for for spare time and do this interview with us. My question is there anything that's new to you that you didn't expect him to refer to in his speech, like his personal experience working in the countryside, which is quite rare in the Chinese leaders' speech, you know, the personal touch. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting, because clearly there's a political aspect to all leaders' speeches, and I don't want to go down that path. But at the same time, looking at this as an economist, clearly 2022 is a more challenging time, even though I'm positive about the outlook for China and the global economy in 2022. It is a more challenging economic context. And so the fact that President Xi Jinping mentions the countryside also has an economic connotation to it, because it fits in with the fact that he wants to convey that he knows what difficult times can be like. So that's the important economic message as well. In the speech, and I think China should be congratulated on this, was the reference to eradicating extreme poverty. Sometimes people take this for granted in a bizarre way, but when we actually look back to 1979, or indeed in the 1994 and 97, depending on when you want to say opening up the economy really occurred, there's been great advances made. So if I'm correct from the speech, I think there was about 5 different areas that the president talked about in terms of successes for last year, or 5 issues that he talked about. Poverty reduction was one of them. Clearly, from an international perspective, people with a political hat on will note his reference to military build-up, and that military build-up will be tied in with some other areas within the speech. So again, it's very much about looking at this speech in terms of what were the messages he was trying to convey, but also looking at this speech in terms of where people are coming from. If you're a domestic resident in China, you will have a very different approach to the speech. If you're an international economist, you might have one approach. And if you're an international military person or diplomat, you might have a different approach. And the challenge with any speech is to, given that it was probably only 5 minutes or so, it was very quick to read. So it's very difficult to cover everything. At the same time, even a small reference to something, the writer, the conveyor of the speech, will be aware that that can be interpreted in many different ways. So coming back to your question about the countryside, I think that had a very clear domestic message from both his own personal experience, but also from what he's trying to convey about the sort of immediate time ahead. But coming back to the other question, the Chinese Communist Party figured prominently in the speech. And that was one could interpret that in two ways. One, a reflection of the political position in 2022 with the two sessions and the major event in the autumn, but also it's a continuation of what we saw in 2021, where the major celebration was the 100th anniversary of the CCP. So in some respects, that was a natural progression. So as I read it, if I remember, it was CCP and the political aspect, then nature, then the achievements with science figuring prominently, and COVID pandemic coming as a message towards the end, or through it. It was mentioned through it, and a sort of positive aspect about addressing it and overcoming it for the year ahead. So hopefully that answered all the questions. Trying to be very balanced about the speech, as you can tell.
Gerard, have you read the message from Mr. Sheng Haixiong, the president of CMG?
No. What did?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. So because this year, next year, I mean, in February, will be Year of a Tiger. I don't know which year were you born, what zodiac's in your year when you're born.
Yeah, I need to check. I'll give you I was March 1961.
1961 March. Okay, I will check. Yeah, so
I'm sure it's a wonderful one. It was.
Okay.
What one are you?
Yeah. May I have your message to you? Yeah.
This is the year of ox.
Ox.
This is year of ox. Yeah. Next year.
1961.
That's right. That's right. Year of the ox.
Oh, 1961. Oh, actually, you were the same year with my daughter was born in the year of ox last year.
Okay. Congratulations.
Oh, congratulations.
That's
Right.
a lucky one. That's a lucky one because I born in the year of pig.
Right. Okay.
But I'm always of the impression there's always positive characteristics with all the 12 characters, and it's also interesting that every 12 years there's a different one: the wood, a fire, etc. It's quite interesting, but good. What year are you?
My year? Year of snake.
Cool.
Yeah. My year always a turning point. Always something happened.
Okay.
We didn't catch quite a lot of different policy benefit for free service, but then in my year everything would be charged. Anyway, okay, I would like to have your message to the new year as well today. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to say one wants to have a happy, healthy, and prosperous new year. The focus very much is on health in the wake of the pandemic, and the need to continue for people to stay safe, and then prosperity hopefully will follow with sensible economic guidance and leadership.
And for the year of
Great
tiger,
is that people, yeah, I think everyone is. The pandemic has forced lots of people to refocus attention. Grassroots issues have come more to the fore. Green issues have come more to the fore. And geopolitics. I say that the pandemic has resulted in 3 Gs: grassroots, green, and geopolitics. Grassroots, greater focus on the environment. Grassroots, greater focus on international supply chains and countries doing things closer to home. Dual circulation fits within that. The green agenda has been emphasized by the pandemic, and geopolitics has come more to the fore, particularly the relationship between the major countries such as China and the US. So my hope will be that we should be positive, but also I would say the 2 pre-pandemic trends are likely to really establish themselves as we emerge from the pandemic. And they were very evident before the pandemic, naturally, and China was playing a major role in both. One is the digital and data revolution, and the other is the shift in the balance of economic power to the Indo-Pacific region. And here in the United Kingdom, post-Brexit, the UK is trying to position itself very much in that global context and to move up the value curve in terms of scientific progress. So I think Britain is trying to really position itself much in the same way that China is trying to reposition itself in the sort of changing and growing global economy. But it's quite clear that China's playing a dominant leadership role. But here in the UK, we like to think we are and can play a dominant leading role also.
Thank you very much. So Xuan, do you think everything you get?
Yes.
Xuan? Yeah. So should we end up here?
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I think we've got what we want. Yeah.
Okay.
If there's anything else you want, just drop me a text.
Yeah, we'll do. And hopefully you have a lovely, still have a lovely holiday.
Yeah, well, yeah, lovely to see you, and hopefully we'll catch up soon. And
okay, all right. Happy
enjoy
New
the
Year.
remainder of the year of the ox, and good luck in the year of the tiger as we see it soon. Take care to both of you. Bye.
Okay, thank you, Gerard. Bye bye.